She died with a secret sewn into the hem of her dress. The kind of secret that could shatter kings, bury kingdoms, and unmake the pride of gods. But this story begins before that dress, before the curse, before the gold. It begins in silence. Midas sat on his marble throne, unmoving, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond his palace gates. Outside, the wind sang through olive trees, but he heard none of it. The silence wasn't around him, it was within him, thick and loud and unbearable. His fingers, long and calloused, tightened around the edge of the throne. There was no warmth in them anymore. Not since the wish. Not since he traded laughter for glitter. Not since everything turned to gold. Once he was a man who adored touch, his daughter's curls, the heat of fresh bread, the soft weight of a loyal dog's head on his knee. But now his touch devoured. It changed everything. It changed him. The courtiers kept their distance. They bowed, nodded, retreated. No one dared come close. Not even the jester who once made him weep with laughter. Not even the cooks who once sang in the morning light. The palace glittered now, cold and grand and hollow. Chandeliers of molten gold, columns plated in shimmering sheets. But nothing lived there anymore. Not really. He looked down at his hand. It still ached where he last touched her, where life turned to gold. He had not spoken since. What was there to say? Words were wasted on stone. The gods had heard his wish, and granted it, in full, with no kindness, with no warning. And now, in the heart of all that shimmered, he sat alone. Not as a king, not as a man, but as a monument to a single whispered desire. Before he was cursed, before the gods listened, Midas was simply a man who loved the smell of soil after rain. His kingdom, though modest, thrived under his steady hand. He walked among his people without guards, offering bread, asking names. They adored him, not for his crown but for his kindness. He listened, truly listened, and made things grow with the touch of his effort, not yet with gold. The palace was humble then, alive with laughter and the scent of citrus trees. His daughter ran barefoot through the gardens, her laughter trailing behind like music. Every corner of that world shimmered with life, not wealth. The birds sang. The people danced. And the king, he smiled. But deep in the roots of joy, a seed of longing grew. Not for riches, but for permanence. He wanted to protect it all. His child, his kingdom, his peace, from the decay of time. He feared loss more than war. He feared silence more than chaos. And so when the gods offered him a choice, any gift, any blessing, he asked for the one thing he thought would preserve his joy. The golden touch. The gods heard him. Or perhaps they heard the sorrow beneath the wish. They descended not in thunder, but in a breeze that made the olive leaves shimmer. One by one, time stopped around him. The birds froze mid-flight. The air held its breath. A figure emerged from the shimmer. A tall woman cloaked in moonlight, her eyes like molten silver. She didn't smile. She only said, "Are you certain?" Midas, unaware of what that question would cost, nodded. "Let all I touch turn to gold." She raised a hand and pressed it gently to his brow. No spark. No light. Only a deep, unnatural silence. Then the world resumed, but Midas had already changed. Not outwardly. Not yet. But the seed of gold had been planted in his blood. At first it was wondrous. A flower touched became gold. A stone, a table, a goblet, all turned radiant. The court gasped, then cheered. Gold poured into the treasury. Statues were erected. Songs composed. But wonder quickly soured. Food became metal before it touched his lips. Water turned solid in his mouth. He tried to laugh it off, but hunger clawed at him. His servants began to disappear, not in rebellion, but out of fear. He tried to hold his daughter's hand, and that was the moment the world collapsed. She ran to him, arms outstretched. "Father!" she cried. And he, forgetting, opened his arms. The touch was brief. A second. Maybe less. But that was enough. Her skin froze beneath his fingers. Her face, once filled with life, shimmered into stillness. She became a statue. Eyes wide. Smile frozen. A girl of gold. Midas screamed then, once raw and full. The sound echoed through halls and hills, but no god answered. His curse was sealed. Not in gold, but in grief. They wrapped the statue in silk and hid it behind a locked door, but Midas visited her every day. He knelt, spoke to her softly, brushed dust from her cheeks. He did not cry again. His grief had turned inward, calcified like everything he loved. The days stretched into one another, indistinguishable and dim. He stopped eating. Not that he could. Even when food was placed before him, he stared at it like a stranger. His servants left it and fled. None dared stay. He wandered the palace alone. Every step echoed through halls of gold. Birds no longer nested in the rafters. Flowers stopped blooming. Even the sun seemed to avoid the windows. The world had silenced itself in mourning for the girl. But deep inside the silence, his mind began to whisper. Regret gnawed at him. Memory haunted him. He saw her in every shadow, heard her laughter in the distant moan of wind. His curse was not just in his hands, it was in his soul. He clutched at the air sometimes, as if hoping it would resist, hoping the gods might take pity. But the gods were distant things, amused perhaps, or indifferent. The gift they gave had no instructions. No mercy, no return. Still, each dawn he returned to her, sat at her feet, told her stories, told her the world was still spinning, told her he remembered the smell of her hair, and that he would find a way, even if it broke him. The priests came bearing incense and warnings. They whispered of balance and punishment. No mortal may wield what only gods command, they said. But Midas did not answer. He simply watched as smoke curled around the golden floor. They urged him to pray, to fast, to renounce. But he had already lost what mattered. What remained to sacrifice? What penance was there that could return the warm weight of a child's hand? The priests left with frightened eyes, murmuring of omens. In secret, they began to spread the tale. That Midas was no longer man, but living statue. That his heart beat no more. That the palace was cursed, and none who entered would leave unchanged. His people turned their backs. The market stalls, once alive with song, now stood silent. The palace gates closed. Roads overgrown. And the gold, the endless, gleaming gold, lay untouched in heaps behind stone walls, useless in the shadow of what it had taken. And still, each morning, he rose to whisper to her statue, as though her soul might still be there, trapped beneath the metal, waiting. It was the old gardener who broke the silence. A man with weathered skin and a crooked back. He'd known Midas before the crown. He entered without bowing, without trembling. And when he saw the statue, he did not look away. He sat beside the king, silent for a long time. Then he said, "There's still earth beneath all this." Midas turned to him slowly, not understanding. The gardener pointed to the palace's edge. "Gold cannot swallow roots unless we let it." Midas blinked. The words cut through him like a wind. No one had spoken to him as a man in weeks. The old man rose and limped toward the courtyard. There, amidst the gleaming ruin, he pulled free a patch of soil and pressed a seed into it. It was not a miracle. Nothing bloomed instantly. But it was a beginning. And in that moment, Midas felt something shift. Not in the curse, but in himself. A crack of light inside stone. That night, Midas walked through the palace barefoot. The gold beneath his feet no longer shone. It felt cold, foreign. He entered the great hall and tore down a tapestry. He crushed a chalice. He shouted into silence. The echo startled him. It was the first sound in weeks that felt real. He shouted again. His voice cracked. He fell to his knees and wept, true, soundless weeping that trembled through the walls. Gold cracked beneath his palms. He spoke aloud to the gods. Not begging, not cursing, just naming. Naming what he lost. Naming what he missed. His daughter's crooked smile. The heat of summer air. Not the warmth of bread. The rustle of her feet in morning grass. I was a fool, he said. And I would trade everything I have left for one more hour of her laughter. Then silence again. But this time, it did not crush him. It simply sat beside him. Outside, the seed sprouted. Just one green stem, trembling in the cold. The gardener knelt beside it, cupping it with calloused hands, whispering songs older than memory. The wind shifted. The soil warmed. Midas saw it from the balcony. Just a leaf, barely visible. But alive. Not golden. Not cursed. Just life. Raw and fragile and real. He knelt at the railing, stunned. His hands even now still shimmered with danger. But he did not reach for it. He knew then what he had to do. The gods had given him a gift twisted by his own desire. But perhaps they would grant him one more. A chance to undo it. A chance to give, instead of take. To heal, instead of preserve. He turned from the balcony. Not with hope. Not with certainty. But with choice. And that was the first power that felt human. The journey began before sunrise. Midas wrapped his hands in linen soaked with oil, not to protect others, but to remind himself of what they could do. The touch could still destroy. Every step he took was a quiet defiance against fear. He wore no crown. He carried no blade. Only the weight of his grief, and the hope that the gods might listen once more. The guards at the gate didn't stop him. They bowed, surprised, but said nothing. Some even looked away. Beyond the palace, the city was unrecognizable. The streets once filled with laughter now echoed with silence. Market stalls stood abandoned. Gold lay scattered like bones, untouched and unwanted. No one trusted its gleam anymore. Midas passed a fountain where children once played. Now dry, its statues flaked with dust, it stood like a monument to a joy forgotten. He placed a single coin at its base, not to pay, but to mourn. A gesture. A memory. He did not look back. Every step forward was a break from who he had been. His robes swept dust from the road, but his mind remained heavy. He would walk until the gods answered, or until his silence swallowed him whole. He climbed the mountain trail slowly, feet blistered, throat raw. The gods were not near. They dwelled in places no map named. But the path still led upward, through fog, through wind that seemed to whisper judgment. Memories followed him like ghosts. His daughter's voice echoed through tree branches. Her laughter danced in the breeze. Sometimes he stopped, eyes wide, almost expecting to see her there. But the forest was empty. Wild animals kept their distance. Perhaps they sensed what he was. Or perhaps they too mourned. The trees bent overhead, their leaves brown despite the season. Even nature seemed to know what he had done. At the ridge, he collapsed. His breath came shallow. The air was thin. He looked up at the sky, colorless and vast. "You gave me gold," he whispered, "but not wisdom. I'm asking now, not for power, but for mercy." There was no answer. Only the rustle of pine needles and the beat of his heart against stone. But something inside him softened. For the first time, he was not demanding. He was simply speaking. At the peak, a shrine stood, ancient, broken, overgrown. Vines coiled around crumbling pillars. No offerings remained. Just stone, time, and silence. Midas stepped into the circle and removed the linen from his hands. He held them out, trembling. "This is what I was given," he said. "And this is what it took." He placed his hands on the altar stone. Nothing turned to gold. Nothing moved. But the wind stopped. The air thickened. He felt the weight of eyes, not seen, not heard, but felt, as though the mountain itself had turned to witness. His heart pounded, not from fear, from the unfamiliar presence of being seen, truly seen. He whispered her name. Once, soft and broken, it cracked in the air like thunder. A single tear fell from his cheek to the altar. Then, another, and another. His grief poured out, not as gold, but as water, pure and salt and real. And something shifted. He did not notice the stream at first. It bubbled beneath the shrine, hidden in shadow. But as his tears soaked the altar, the stream glowed faintly. Silver, not gold. Alive, not cursed. A river that had no beginning, no end. The ground pulsed beneath him. The wind carried voices, not words, but emotion. Forgiveness. Sorrow. Pain. A promise not of reversal, but of redemption. The gods had not punished him. He had punished himself. The stream widened. A cup formed in the stone beside him naturally, impossibly. Water gathered. Clear, still, waiting. Midas reached for it slowly, his hands shaking. For her, he whispered. If anything can be undone, let it be this. He did not drink. He held it to his heart, and then turned, robes flaring, the cup steady in his hands. There was no thunder, no voice, just the feeling that something ancient had listened, and had answered. He descended the mountain with slow, measured steps. The cup in his hands did not spill. The wind had calmed. The trees whispered nothing. He walked not as a king, not as a curse, but as a father. The city awaited, changed. The people gathered not in fear, but in silence. They saw the cup. They saw his face. And they did not kneel. They simply stepped aside. A path opened through the crowd like a breath held and finally released. At the gates, the gardener stood waiting. He said nothing, but his eyes gleamed. Midas nodded once. They walked together, through halls still golden, past memories still painful, until they reached the chamber. There, beneath blue silk, she waited, unchanged, untouched, eternal. Midas knelt beside her and gently touched her cheek with a drop from the cup. One drop, wall. No more. It glowed. Then shimmered. Then melted into warmth. Her eyes fluttered. Her eyes fluttered once. Then again. Color flushed her cheeks like dawn breaking after endless night. Midas held his breath, not daring to move. Her lips parted, and with a soft gasp, she whispered, "Father." Time broke in two. He fell forward, catching her shoulders, but not touching with his palms. His arms wrapped carefully behind her, and he wept into her hair. She was warm, breathing, real. The curse, for that moment, was undone. She blinked slowly, eyes wide in confusion. "Where did I go?" she asked. He couldn't answer. Not yet. He simply shook his head and said, "You're here?" She leaned into him, as if sensing the weight he carried. Outside the chamber, the wind stirred. The silk curtain lifted like it was exhaling. Light streamed in, not golden, but natural, soft, human, pure. Midas looked up through tears and whispered to no one, "Thank you." But the moment was fragile. The gods give, yes, but they also watch. And their gifts often come with conditions that the heart doesn't understand until it is too late. They walked the halls together in silence. Her bare feet padded softly over cold stone. Midas moved like a man reborn, every glance toward her lined with disbelief and reverence. She touched the walls, the curtains, the marble. None of it turned. He watched her carefully, scanning her fingers after every step. But nothing shimmered. Nothing froze. His curse had not passed to her. Not yet. But it lingered in his hands. He could still feel the hum beneath his skin. In the garden, they paused. She looked at the sprouting plant and tilted her head. "It's so small," she said. Midas knelt beside her. "So were you once," he whispered. They smiled. For a breath, the world forgot it had ever shattered. But he knew joy this pure could not come without a cost. He had been given a second chance. The question that haunted him now wasn't how, but why? What had changed? And for how long would this mercy last? That night, she dreamed of the river. Not the one she'd seen, but the one her father had described. A stream glowing beneath roots and rocks. In the dream, it spoke to her, not in words but in warmth. A calling. A promise. She woke before dawn and found him sitting at the edge of the fountain. He didn't hear her approach. His thoughts were far away. When he noticed her, he smiled, tired, grateful. "I thought I lost you," he said. She sat beside him. "When I had a dream," she said. A river, glowing, whispering. He looked up sharply. "The mountain," he said. "It called to you too." She nodded. Neither of them understood, but both believed. Something unfinished still lingered. The curse was not undone. It had only paused. The gods were watching still. The river hadn't saved her alone. It had chosen her, and it was calling her back. By noon the whispers had begun. The people saw the girl. Alive, below, walking down, laughing. Some dropped to their knees. Others fled. They feared her more than they'd feared the king. A child reborn was not a miracle. It was a warning. Midas heard them murmuring behind closed doors. "She carries the god mark," they said. "She'll bring judgment." He tried to calm them. He opened the palace gates, spoke plainly. But fear is louder than truth. He realized too late. Her return was not only joy, it was disruption. The world had mourned her, had accepted her death, and now her life felt like defiance against fate. The gods had unbalanced something. Or perhaps he had. And through it all his daughter stayed silent. She watched. She listened. And in her eyes something ancient had begun to grow. Not age, but understanding. As if the river had left something behind in her soul. That evening, the girl stood at the edge of the garden, eyes on the horizon. She said, "I need to go back." Midas froze. "To the mountain?" She nodded. "The river is waiting. It showed me something. It wants something from me." He argued, pleaded. "You just return to me. Don't leave." But her voice was calm. "It's not about leaving, Father. It's about finishing the story." Her words felt too old for her mouth, too final. But he knew they were true. She was not the same child. She had crossed something no human should. And now she was more than herself. Midas clenched his hands. The curse had taken so much. Now it asked him to let go of what it gave back. She stepped forward and hugged him. This time he did not flinch. Her touch was warm, steady. "I'll come back," she said. "But not as a child. When I return, I'll carry the river." And in the darkening garden, Midas wept again. She left before the sun rose. The palace was still. Only the gardener saw her go, handing her a satchel of dried fruit and a whisper of luck. She didn't look back. Her steps were soft, sure. Like she already knew the path. Midas watched from the high balcony, hand pressed to his chest. He did not call out. He could not. There was power in silence now, and in trust. He closed his eyes as she vanished into the trees. She climbed faster than her father had. The path welcomed her. The air changed. The forest leaned inward like it remembered her. No beasts emerged. No threat lingered. Even the wind moved gently at her back. At the ridge, she paused, staring into the sky. The clouds swirled. The shrine below gleamed faintly, but there was something new now. Beneath the shrine, the earth pulsed, alive, calling her by name, though no voice was heard. She stepped forward, and the air shimmered. At the shrine she stood still. The stones were warm beneath her feet, though no sun touched them. The vines had shifted, forming a perfect circle around the altar. The river beneath pulsed louder now, its voice inside her bones. She closed her eyes and raised her hands. Not in power, but in offering. I was taken and I was returned, she said. Not for me. For him, now let me return the gift. No god appeared. No thunder cracked. But the light changed. A beam from nowhere touched the shrine. The wind thickened into music. She stepped forward, placing her palms on the altar. Her eyes glowed. Her skin shimmered faintly. But the gold did not return. What flowed through her was something older than curses, balance. She was the river now. The gift reborn, not as a punishment, but as a choice. And she chose. Midas awoke with a gasp. His palms burned, not with pain, but warmth. He unwrapped them and saw no gold. Only skin. Human. While mortal. He stumbled to his feet, running to the garden. The sprout had bloomed overnight. A tree stood where once was only soil, its branches full of leaves. No fruit, no gold, just life. Pure, green, defiant. He dropped to his knees, breathless. The curse had lifted, not broken by force but by surrender. He touched the earth without fear, dug his fingers deep into soil. He sobbed, not out of sorrow, but awe. He had been given back the one thing gold could never offer: simplicity, mortality, realness. He knew she had done this. His daughter. Not as a child now, but as something more. Something sacred. She was still his, but also the river's. The mountains. The balance between wanting and letting go. She returned just before sunset. Quietly, like mist curling over the ground. The guards didn't see her. The wind carried her through the garden, into the throne room. Midas turned as if he had felt her steps in his chest. She stood taller, her eyes older, but her smile was the same. "It's finished," she said. He couldn't speak. He crossed the room, knelt before her, and pressed his forehead to her hands. She laughed softly, and he wept. "I am not cursed," he whispered. She nodded. "Not anymore." She took his hand, unwrapped the linen, and kissed his knuckles. His hands were whole, clean, warm, ugly, wow. The throne behind him meant nothing now. In that moment, there was no king, no goddess, no gold, just a father and a daughter, and the quiet hum of a world finally righting itself. The throne was empty the next morning, not abandoned, but transformed. The palace gates swung open. Birds returned. Water flowed in fountains again. The tree in the garden bloomed without needing gold. Midas walked through the town not as a ruler, but as a man. People looked at him, then past him, to her. The girl who had once been stone now walked among them, smiling. Her steps left warmth in their wake. She touched no one, but they felt her presence as a blessing. Not divine, not unreachable, just real. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the world quieted to listen. And Midas, he smiled more now, laughed softly, slept peacefully. He had lost much, but what remained was more than enough. He had learned the hardest truth: letting go was the only way to hold on. The people began to speak of her not as royalty, but as something older. "The river child," they whispered. She smiled when she heard it, not with pride, but with understanding. Names didn't matter. Presence did. And she had returned to stay. Midas no longer ruled from a throne. He ruled from the road, walking the kingdom with her at his side. They visited farms, temples, ruined places gold had ruined. Everywhere they went, things grew again, not fast, but true. He taught the people to touch again, to hold hands, plant seeds, build stone by stone. She, too, showed them how to sit still, how to listen. She didn't say much, but what she didn't speak, the world filled in. Where once there had been fear, now there was reverence. Where once there had been greed, now there was care. Gold remained, but only as memory. The real treasure now was time and attention. In every corner of the kingdom, stories bloomed again. One morning she stood at the edge of a river, the real one, not the sacred one beneath the shrine. She knelt, placed her hand into the stream and smiled. "It doesn't speak anymore," she said. "It's quiet now, like it's resting." Midas stood behind her, unsure of what to say. He knew the silence wasn't absence, it was peace. The river no longer called. It had given its gift and returned to sleep. His daughter had carried it long enough. Now it carried her gently. They sat together in silence, letting the current flow past their feet. A fisherman passed nearby and waved. Children played downstream. Life had resumed, not in spite of the story, but because of it. The curse had never truly been about gold. It had been about longing, about holding too tightly, about forgetting that everything precious is fragile. The gods hadn't punished him, they had reminded him. Back at the palace, Midas removed the golden plates from the walls. He gave them to the builders, the smiths, the temples, not as wealth but as tools. "Let this be melted down," he said, "and made into things that serve, not shine." His daughter watched quietly as golden statues were dismantled. The one of her, the one that had stood frozen for months, was melted last. He didn't watch it burn. He only pressed his hand to his heart as the fire turned cold metal to warm liquid. They saved only one thing, a single golden petal from a flower she had once picked before the curse. She kept it in a pouch, not for memory, but to remind herself how close beauty could come to destruction if held too tightly. The palace changed slowly. Stone replaced gold. Music returned to its halls. Laughter rang again. But most of all, silence returned. Not the heavy kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that holds space for gratitude. Word of the girl spread beyond borders. Some came seeking miracles. Others came hoping to touch her, to ask for wishes. She never answered their questions. She only asked one of her own. "What are you willing to lose to get what you want?" Few stayed long after that. She was not a goddess. She was not a prophet. She was a reminder, a breath between desire and consequence. Her silence taught more than speeches ever could. Midas protected her fiercely, but from a distance. She needed no armor now. She stood in markets, fields near firesides listening. I bowed her winter stroll, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping with strangers, always present, never above them. They called her many things, but she always said, "I'm just someone who returned." And that was more than enough. One evening, Midas sat beneath the old tree in the garden, the one that bloomed from the first seed. He held a cup of warm tea, staring at the stars. She joined him, quietly slipping under his arm like she used to. They didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you miss it?" He looked at her, puzzled. "The gold," she said. He shook his head. "It never loved me back." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. Above them the stars moved in silence. The world turned. The palace breathed. And beneath their feet, roots reached quietly toward water, toward depth, toward life. He had once asked for everything he touched to turn to gold. Now, everything he touched stayed exactly as it was. And that, he finally knew, was the real magic. The years passed like petals falling from an unseen tree. Seasons came and went, and the kingdom thrived, not because of gold, but because of gentleness. Midas grew older. His back curved. His voice softened. But his eyes remained bright. He tended gardens now, barefoot in soil, laughing with children who didn't know his story. To them he was the man with dirt under his nails and songs in his throat. They didn't fear his hands. They tugged them and asked for stories. The girl, no longer a girl, not quite a woman, became a traveler. She left and returned, always barefoot, always carrying river water in her soul. She never stayed long. But whenever she came home, the winds changed. The villagers spoke of her with awe. They didn't call her princess. They called her the one who listens. And they said the trees leaned toward her when she passed. And Midas? He never touched gold again. On a quiet evening she returned again, not as a child, not as a messenger, but as something in between. Midas stood at the doorway before she knocked. "I knew it was you," he said, eyes filled with light. "The wind told me." They sat beneath the stars. She didn't speak at first. She only placed a small bundle beside him. Inside, a stone from the river, a sprig of mountain herb, and a page filled with names she had learned in her travels. "These are stories I was meant to carry," she said. "And now they're yours too." Midas smiled. "You always bring gifts no one else would know how to wrap." She laughed. It sounded like the first day of spring. He told her everything he had seen in her absence. About the boy who learned to write, the old widow who started painting, the tree that still bloomed. And as he spoke, she leaned her head against his shoulder again. That night, the stars seemed lower, closer. She stood at the edge of the field, looking up, arms slightly lifted. The wind circled her like a memory. Midas watched from afar, and for the first time he felt no fear in watching her walk away. She would go again. He knew that. She had places to be, wounds to soothe, truths to uncover. She belonged not to one village or throne, but to the world. And the world, at last, had earned her presence. He whispered her name softly, not to call her, but to remember her sound. She turned once and smiled. That smile said everything. That he had been enough. That he had let go. That he had learned how to love without holding. She stepped into the shadows of night, and the stars followed her like guardians. Midas lived many more years. Quietly. Fully. He never wore his crown again. It sat on a shelf gathering dust. The people brought him stories instead of tribute, and he gave them time instead of commands. He became the old man who planted trees he would never see bloom, who carved benches from wood and left them by the river, who taught children the difference between treasure and value. One winter he did not rise. The fire still burned. The tea remained warm. But he had gone. Not in sorrow. Not in fear. Just quietly. As though the world had gently exhaled. They buried him beneath the tree in the garden. No gold. No statue. Just a single line carved into stone. He chose to let go. And above the tree bloomed again, eerily, full, defiantly green against frost. And somewhere, far beyond the mountain, beyond even the river, she sat beneath a sky with no stars, listening. Not to gods. Not to curses. But to silence. The kind that follows when a story has ended, but the echo still hums. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the golden petal. It hadn't aged. Hadn't faded. Just shimmered softly in the moonless dark. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just looked at it and nodded once. Then she let it go. It floated, caught by wind, dancing weightless. Not toward the sky, not toward the ground, but into the space between. And the final truth whispered through the quiet. He lived, yes. But no one ever looked him in the eye again.